These last few months, I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos talking about AI, specifically generative AI. I didn't mean to. A few of the people I subscribed to released videos, then YouTube's algorithm kept promoting more, and I kept clicking and watching. And as a result, I have a lot of thoughts I want to share. Too many for one video, so I'm doing three. This video, part one, will cover my usage of LLMs and why I decided to mostly stop using them. Part two will cover my concerns about how LLMs work and are being used. And part three will cover my specific thoughts on using generative AI in any way to write a story. I am a hobbyist writer, so this is very relevant to me. I'm still figuring things out, but I found working on these videos really helpful. I mentioned before on this channel that I was numb for years and my brain still feels rusty. I'm constantly having to remind myself to think instead of defaulting to avoidance and apathy. These videos have helped with that. For a quick overview of my LMM usage, I use Midjourney on and off from April 2023 to August 2024. Around December 2024, I started using Chatgpt, the free version, because I wanted to get serious about starting a YouTube channel and writing a web novel. During 2025, I also tried out the free versions of Sciria, Perplexity, and Claude. Then in December 2025, I quit ChatGPT and switched to the free version of Gemini, which I used until January 2026 before deciding to make my usage of it more scarce. Since then, I've used Gemini and Claude once more each. This video is mostly in chronological order of when I stopped using each one, but I also include sections just focusing on my experience using LLMs for specific situations like legal advice. I do also touch on the AI education crisis and my thoughts on using LLMs to write. Timestamps are below. So let's start with my very first LLM, Midjourney. When I first heard of generative AI, I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was magic. My second brother introduced it to me by generating a cover for my body swap priestess story idea, and I was blown away. The idea that by writing a prompt, you could generate whatever image you wanted seemed amazing. And I got carried away for around a year, on and off. I want to say gradually the shine wore off, that the hours I wasted trying to generate an image and it just not coming out right wore on me. But the truth is, even with that and other issues, I still plan to use Midjourney to create cover art for my web novels when I eventually publish them. But then I learned what generative AI actually is, how using it harms the environment, and how LLMs are trained on stolen works. And I made the personal decision to stop generating images. Admittedly, this was an easy choice for me to make because I wasn't that invested. If I really need artwork, I can afford to pay an artist. I can use non-AI stock footage that can be found. It's tricky because so much AI keeps getting mixed in with stock footage now. It's hard to tell, but I can try. Or I can draw the cover myself because I don't think covers have to be good. Thing is, this knowledge did not stop me from eventually using LLMs like ChatGPT because they're not the same. One is clearly plagiarizing art. The other is not as clear cut. It just feels different, so it was easier to justify using it. Sciria AI is an AI-powered search engine. Someone on Reddit was raving about it being great for research, and since I struggle and tend to procrastinate when researching, I was pretty excited to try it out. I decided to test it by asking it, what are the best platforms for publishing web novels in 2025? I've been researching this on and off for a future video, so I know the answer. Therefore, I was confident I would know if Sciria was a good research tool or not. Aesthetically, I like its website and the whole production of it, especially how it generated footnotes. That was nice. Unfortunately, when it wasn't pushing AI, it was giving me error messages. Even now, I plan to show screenshots and really go into the AI of it all. But as you can see, error message. While adorable, this is frustrating and has really soured me on Sciria. Also, I realized after the fact, but Sciria uses other AI models and apparently Grok is the default, which might explain the AI pushing. I was pretty upset to realize this because I don't want to use Grok, but I can only be mad at myself for not noticing. All in all, never again. I heard Perplexity was similar to Sciria, but better, and because I really don't want to do my own research, I decided to check it out. Again, I asked what are the best platforms to publish web novels in 2025. Its answer was too broad, so I clarified I was only looking for serial fiction, and the results were mostly what I expected. It did include Radish and Kindlevella, despite them having gone out of business. It also mentioned Moonquill, but when I told it that Moonquill doesn't publish serial fiction, it corrected itself. I do question the inclusion of later press, despite what Perplexity states. It's not like other web novel platforms, but overall, this was an okay starting place. My second brother recommended Anthropic's LLM Claude, and aesthetically, I like it. But from the start, my experience using it was not great. And don't worry, I'm not going into every instance I use Claude. Just a few to make my point. Same for ChatGPT and Gemini. First, I asked it, is there a better way to phrase the last sentence? Instead, it rephrased the sentence from the middle of the paragraph I supplied. Sure, that sentence needed help, but that's not what I asked. Now, my second brother uses Claude for coding help, so maybe it's not good at writing help, is what I thought. So next, I asked it for help with Davinci Resolve and Adobe After Effects. And let me tell you, I got real sick of being told I'm absolutely right because it was wrong so many times. Maybe if I understood DaVinci Resolve and Adobe After Effects better, I could have figured out why its advice didn't work, but I don't, so it was not very helpful. I decided to give Claude one final chance. I asked it advice about which version of this thumbnail looks better. It told me these two images were the same, and when I pointed out they weren't, that one was wearing different colored clothes and missing a nose, it said, "You're absolutely right." It then proceeded to tell me the image on the right was better. When I pointed out that that was the one with the missing nose, it said, "You're absolutely right. The image on the left is better." And it was at that moment I decided to not just stop using Claude, but to never ask any LMM for thumbnail advice again. I didn't even bother asking it about web novel platforms. Look, I laughed at Anthropic's ads dunking on OpenAI, but I never want to use it again. Not for moral reasons, but because it sucks. I know it's gotten better since I tried it last year. I did, while working on this video, ask it to compare the same two thumbnails. It bothered me that I couldn't find the original chat. It did actually acknowledge they were different this time, but still didn't notice the missing nose.
Why are you the way that you are?
I'm getting ahead of myself, but my feelings towards Anthropic are like a roller coaster. I went from viewing them as not for me to wishing hype master Dario Amade would shut up to appreciating they at least have a line they won't cross to finding the way they made it so frictionless to switch from ChatGPT to Claude impressive to hoping they win their lawsuit against the US government designating them as a supply chain risk, to being reminded of everything about them that I do not like as a company, to now learning they may work with the military again, thanks to Mythos. I'm just kinda sick of them. Back in December, my second brother, being the amazing person he is, looked into legal advice on an issue that could screw me over. First, he asked Claude, the paid version, for advice so he'd have a basic understanding before speaking to a lawyer. Then he consulted two lawyers and found that Claude had misled him. After, he uploaded his chat with Claude and recordings of his conversations with the lawyers to Gemini, the paid version, and it told him that Claude was dangerously wrong. This was Claude's response. Okay. Somehow, this experience did not stop my second brother from recently asking Claude for legal advice on a business venture he's pursuing, and he seems pretty happy with the results, so take from that what you will. Last year, the LMM I used the most was OpenAI's ChatGPT. I used it a lot, and I really liked it at first. I could ask it anything without feeling stupid. I actually stopped using Google for a while because I preferred ChatGPT's personalized answers. It was just very reassuring and easy to use, but eventually my dissatisfaction with it started to build. While I loved getting personalized answers, I found myself growing distrustful of its advice. For example, I remember asking it if there were any drive rollators with seats wider than the drive nitros, which is 18 inches wide. It told me the Drive Nitro Duet was 19 inches wide, but when I checked the Drive Medical website, I learned it was actually 17.5 inches wide. I will say that ChatGPT did help me realize the Drive Nitro's handles were the reason my dad found sitting in it so snug compared to other rollators with narrower seats. But this wasn't the first time ChatGPT lied to me about a product. Eventually, I made the decision to stop wasting time asking it and just went back to Googling Reddit or checking Amazon directly. Then there's my next example, which I believe is the last time I asked ChatGPT for help on a video. Back when I was working on my Back to Writing update video, I wanted to find a video clip about someone realizing they're an amateur and being upset. I loved the quote it gave me from Good Will Hunting. "You're just a kid. You don't have the faintest idea what you're talking about. You presume to know everything about me because you read all the books, but you're an amateur." So I asked ChatGPT, where can I find that quote? It gave a timestamp and even explained the scene it was from, only it wasn't from that scene. In fact, it wasn't in the movie at all. Turns out ChatGPT paraphrased. So I asked it if there was a show or movie that had a similar line, literally. Eventually, I settled on the Queen Gambit quote. I thought I was ready. I wasn't. I'm not as good as I thought. Only I couldn't find that quote, and neither could ChatGPT. And it had the audacity to blame me, saying I misremembered it. I had to remind it that it was the one that told me about that line. This was its response. Yes, you're right. That was me mentioning it earlier. I should clarify. I paraphrased that moment from the Queen's Gambit rather than quoting it word for word. That's when I got mad. At that point, I didn't believe ChatGPT wasn't still paraphrasing. So I ignored its other suggestions and just Googled, which led me to find and use everyone wears sunscreen. To be fair, every experience using ChatGPT wasn't like this. It's the reason why my first thumbnail didn't end up looking like this. It helped me figure out story and video titles and which free fonts on Canva I should use. It gave me feedback on my scripts, which occasionally I did listen to, like when it recommended how I should rearrange the sections in my I attempt world building video and how to spell world building. When working on my script for my second video, What I Learned Reading 1000 Words, I struggled. I did not like what I wrote, but I couldn't figure out how to fix it, so I let ChatGPT rewrite it. Then I rewrote what it wrote. I didn't feel good about it though, and I never did it again. Well, more on that later. The fact that that's also the only video I used Adobe Podcast to improve my audio on, resulting in my voice sounding like AI, is ironic. But after my I attempt world building video, I did stop plugging my scripts into ChatGPT for feedback. I started asking it more things like, does this paragraph make sense? Or which word works better in this sentence? I found that more helpful. Honestly, the more I use ChatGPT, the more I learn what not to use it for. Like with Claude, I used to ask it for advice on using Davinci Resolve, but I found it was better to just Google and watch a YouTube tutorial instead. Unfortunately, YouTube tutorials on creating audio visualizers using Adobe After Effects are not as plentiful. Maybe someone more knowledgeable can tell me why, but despite following ChatGPT's instructions, I was unable to replicate this audio visualizer. Then in December, I decided to stop using ChatGPT and switch to Gemini. I just learned too much about Sam Altman, and honestly, at that point, I wasn't really using it that much. I like to believe it's because I'd become more comfortable creating videos and writing, so I wasn't as reliant on it. I didn't really have anything else I needed to use it for. Now, before I move on, I want to talk about when I asked ChatGPT what are the best platforms for publishing web novels in 2025. Overall, it did a good job. It mentioned Moonquill, but agreed with me when I said it doesn't publish serial fiction. It did get weird when it came to Neovel. I told it Neovel no longer exists, that one of its creators created a new website called Perfiction using the old link. ChatGPT did not agree with me. It said the app still existed. I was skeptical, but what if ChatGPT was right? So I downloaded the app and it would not open. When I told ChatGPT, it suddenly realized that Neovel appears to be defunct as of mid-2025. Also, ChatGPT didn't mention Radish, which is good since it's also defunct, but it did mention Kindle Vella, which is bad because Kindle Vella is also defunct. I'm so curious. I know LLMs are trained on scraped data, but in the library where I work, when a nonfiction book is a certain age, we discard it because it could contain outdated and misleading information. Do LLMs have something like that that makes sure their data is up to date and accurate? Or do they need to wait until the next model is released for that to happen? This one's tricky. I did go to ChatGPT for advice on working through a bigoted thought, and in the moment I felt like it helped, but the more time passes, the more I question what it actually helped. I liked the idea that ChatGPT wouldn't judge me, and when I shared my thought, it was very reassuring. I wouldn't say it gave me therapy advice, it just rephrased what I said in a nicer way and asked me questions. And through this back and forth, I understood better why I had this thought and I felt less ashamed and more justified. My reasoning felt clearer. I remember being so blown away by this experience that I kept recommending it to someone on Reddit even when they kept saying, no, I don't want to use it. I was so excited. I wanted to share what worked for me on the off chance it could help them too. Thankfully, I'm now learning to be better about listening and not pushing. This isn't an excuse, but it feels better to get carried away in excitement than being depressed. It's funny though. I was so hyped from this experience, and yet I never used ChatGPT like this again. In hindsight, I did have some issues. I've gone to therapy for over 10 years, and when I talk to a therapist, I only have around 45 to 60 minutes. But ChatGPT doesn't have a time limit. It also keeps trying to prolong the chat, because it wants me to keep using it, but it never really went beyond what I brought up myself. So it kept asking me similar questions, and it was almost like I was stuck in a time loop with slight variations each loop. I could not do it for longer than 15, 25 minutes. The me now wouldn't recommend, unless you plan to talk to a therapist about the experience afterwards, maybe. Now, I don't have experience with this, so maybe I shouldn't say anything. But I keep hearing stories about people using LLMs for relationship advice, and it just feels so wild because LLMs are on your side. Unless you prompt it a certain way, it will just reassure you that you're right, which seems unhelpful for relationships, but again, I have no experience, and this is just an assumption. I will say, my second brother and his girlfriend do use an app called Tolan, where you have an alien best friend. Whenever he and his girlfriend fight, they have their aliens talk to each other, sharing what their humans have told them, and that seems to help them, so I don't know. I can't see myself using it. I don't like physically talking to a chatbot like we're having a conversation. I don't know why. This perplexes me. I feel like I should be the target audience for this because I don't have a lot of close relationships and I am lonely, but something about it I just don't like. Back when I was using Alexa, there was one time I told her thank you, and she responded. I did not say, Alexa, thank you. I said, thank you, Alexa, and she's never responded to me before when I've done that. I was so freaked out. My heart actually started racing. One of the reasons I unplugged Alexa was because I didn't want to interact with Alexa Plus. Personally, it just sounds awful. I know some people orally talk to their LLMs and vice versa, but I want no part of that. I'm not sure if this changes anything. Maybe my experience using Chatgpt as a therapist would have felt different if we were communicating orally, but maybe not. I mostly asked Chatgpt for medical advice on Monjaro. I started taking Monjaro over a year ago and found it easier to chat with Chatgpt about it than with my endocrinologist. Let's just say, whenever I went to him about my weight concerns, he would just up my dose. I'm not going to go into detail about everything I asked it, but here's one example. When I wanted the drop from taking the 12.5 dose back to 7.5, ChatGPT was on my side. I do wish it had recommended dropping to the 10 first, but in its defense, I did say the 10 didn't work, and it did tell me to let a doctor know. I'm the one who just refilled my 7.5 and went for it. Do not recommend. I also found ChatGPT helpful when I was getting my sinus surgery. My ENT was great, and he did explain what was going to happen, but I was scared, and when I checked my insurance, there were like 12 procedures involved in this surgery. So ChatGPT explaining each one was reassuring. The only other LLM I asked medical advice from was Gemini. Of course, it was about Monjaro, and thankfully Gemini stopped me from doing something really stupid. I also asked it for sleep advice. I'm not sure what was going on, but I felt tired all the time, despite going to bed earlier. Gemini listed some likely reasons for this, one of which was that sleep happens roughly in 90-minute cycles, and that I might be suffering from sleep inertia. So I asked Gemini for recommendations on what time I should go to sleep, misremembered its suggestion of 11:51 p.m. as 11:21, and decided 11:35 would work better for me instead, which did really help. One negative about working on these Gen AI videos is how it's affected my routine. I long for the days I went to bed at 11:35 p.m. Hopefully I can get back to that once these videos are done. Before January, I hadn't really used Google's LLM Gemini. I think I avoided it because I was salty over Google forcing AI overviews when using its search engine. I actually changed my default search engine to udm14.com to get rid of it. It was very easy to do on my phone, but for some reason much harder on my laptop. I had to go to Settings, Search Engine, Manage Search Engine and Site Search, then click on Add Site Search for it to appear under Search Engine. But even then it wasn't working right. It kept sending me to the UDM search engine instead of just searching. Eventually, I discovered I needed to use this URL, and it worked. It was a whole thing. So I didn't really have any desire to use Gemini, but while working on this script, I found myself curious, especially after hearing it was winning the AI race. So in December, I asked it, what are the best platforms for publishing web novels in 2026? It was consistent with Perplexity and ChatGPT, including mentioning Kindle Vella, Radish, and Moonquill. But when I told it, doesn't Moonquill publish novels, not serial fiction, that gets updated? It responded, you are partially correct. Turns out, Moonquill does also publish serial fiction. I was wrong this whole time, and only Gemini caught that. I was also impressed it recommended AO3 and Space Battles. I felt so good about Gemini in this moment. Thinking about it, my horoscope is also a Gemini. I started using Gemini more and more. I asked it a question about my FPL bill, and it really cleared up my confusion. When I temporarily started handwriting my story again, I found I could just take a picture and upload it to Gemini, and Gemini would tell me my word count. That would have been so helpful when I did the Write 1,000 Words for 14 Days challenge. I've been thinking about moving and possibly changing my career, which is really scary, and chatting with Gemini really helped me not get overwhelmed with anxiety. But inevitably, these good feelings never last. When I worked on my first short, I uploaded it to Gemini and asked it for copyright-free music recommendations, but like ChatGPT, I could not find the music it recommended in YouTube's audio library. Or so I thought, but while double checking for this video, I found I could find these songs if I searched for the song title or artist, but not both. My bad, Gemini. But at the time, I didn't know that and ended up finding Cocktail Lounge by Diala on my own. I love this song, so all's well that ends well. Just to be clear, I was not wrong about ChatGPT. Even when I searched for the song title or artist, I could not find them in the YouTube audio library. I'm not sure why that is, but back to Gemini. I decided I wanted to buy a cordless vacuum. Instead of asking Gemini for recommendations, having learned from my experience using ChatGPT, I Googled Reddit and searched Amazon and found 6 vacuums I liked. I then asked Gemini which of these would work best for hardwood floors and whether any of these were the same vacuum under a different name. Gemini narrowed it down to 2 vacuums, the Louvois and Bessel. I don't really know why it didn't recommend the Black & Decker, but I decided not to ask. According to Gemini, the choice between the Louvois and Bessel comes down to how much I value hair management versus standing convenience, because only the Bessel is able to stand on its own. The Louvois was cheaper and seemed like what I was looking for, but I really wanted a vacuum that stands, so I double-checked and asked Gemini, does the Louvois not self-stand? And it said no, it will fall over because it's top-heavy. So imagine my surprise when I buy the Louvois, and it does, in fact, stand. When I told Gemini, it said, "That's a great catch. I stand corrected. You are absolutely right." It then proceeded to explain why the Louvois could stand.
I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
I'm just so sick of this. And then on January 20th, I transferred my phone number from T-Mobile to Mint, but despite getting an email that the transfer was successful, I wasn't able to make or receive calls. I could only text. For some context, there was an issue when I first tried transferring my phone number, which led to much back and forth calling T-Mobile Mint. It was a real hassle that was finally resolved a week later, and while on the phone with Mint's customer service, I gave her my new port-out PIN, and the call just ended while she was talking. I just didn't want to have to call customer service again, not from my work phone, so I asked Gemini for advice instead. I tried Gemini's first 3 quick fixes, but nothing seemed to work. Finally, I planned to reset my network settings, but as my finger hovered over the button, I found myself pausing. I Googled what exactly happened when you reset your network, and I'm really glad I did because I did not want to deal with my Wi-Fi networks being cleared out and losing my saved passwords. So I ended up going to Mint's website where I discovered it had a customer service chat bot called Foxbot. I talked to Foxbot about my situation and got transferred to a human who said I needed to turn on the eSIM. They emailed me a link, but I couldn't find it in my inbox, so I checked my spam folder where I found 2 emails, one from hours earlier. It turned out the reason I couldn't make or receive calls was because I didn't activate my eSIM, since the email with the instructions to do so was in my spam folder. In that moment, I felt so frustrated and disgusted with myself for wasting time using Gemini instead of just going to Mint's website. And it occurred to me that this keeps happening. Even though there was a better solution that I'll end up doing anyway, instinctively, I would first check with whatever LLM I was using at the time, creating an unnecessary extra step. But why? And then I started thinking about all the times LLMs would give me wrong advice or lie to me, but I just kept using them anyway. Recently, I watched a short by Some More News, and it just really resonated with me.
If you presented a calculator to me and said, this will do any calculation you want, but it'll get a bunch of stuff wrong, and you don't know how often, and you don't know which ones will be wrong, so you have to manually check them all anyway, isn't that useless?
Be sure to check out the full short for their dishwasher analogy. I'm not saying there's no use for LLMs if you have to constantly manually check them, but I do question how useful they really are when there are better, more reliable alternatives available, and that maybe, for me, taking a break from LLMs is the right decision. Now, before I made that decision, I did use Gemini to assist me in creating my first ever resume and to help me write an essay, which was a mistake. Back in January, I got the idea to apply for graduate school. I've been thinking about moving closer to my brothers, but if I do, I'll need to find a new job. I like working in the library, and if I want to continue doing that and make anywhere near what I'm making now, having a master's in library science degree could be beneficial. It's just schools are not doing well. Education has had problems for a long time, and since AI can be an amplifier, it has made these problems so much worse. I don't know what the solution is to stop students from using generative AI to pass classes, but trust me, it's not AI detectors. Those are straight up scams, and the consequences of using them, despite them being unreliable, are real, harmful, and expensive. There's a whole business of selling AI detectors to teachers and these AI humanizers to students. Straight up scam. This isn't like adding invisible watermarks to AI generated images. That seems like it could be helpful, maybe, but you can't do that with generative AI writing. Sure, there are tells, but AI writing is based on real writing. Plus, generative AI has infiltrated every aspect of our lives. It's not strange that people have naturally started sounding and writing like AI themselves. So even if you aren't using generative AI to write, it's not crazy that your writing could still sound like it. There doesn't seem to be a real solution here. And I am nervous. I never had to deal with this when I went to school. And there's advice on what to do if you're falsely accused, the main one being use Google Docs or Word because they show version histories. But I can't stop thinking, can't you just copy that generative AI essay without pasting? Just type it up yourself? I don't know. I hope it's true that more and more colleges are no longer deciding to use these detectors for whatever reason, whether it's because they're getting sued or it's getting too expensive or it's become more well known how unreliable these are and kind of discriminatory, and that I won't have to worry about this if I get into graduate school. I get why schools want to use AI detectors. Besides hoping that their students succeed, it could damage their reputation if students with degrees are not actually qualified. It's just AI paranoia doesn't seem like the best solution. Personally, I like this approach. Just grade students on the work they submit without accusing them of using AI, but I don't know. I mentioned all of this here instead of in part 2 because while I didn't know about any of this when I applied to graduate school in January, I know now, and I cannot stop thinking about it and regretting. In my mind, it's hard to separate all this and some stuff I'm going to mention later and only focus on my actual usage, so I won't. But speaking of my actual usage, in order to apply to graduate school, I needed to write 2 essays, get 3 recommendations, transfer my transcript, and upload my resume. The first essay was super easy, barely an inconvenience, just about why I'm applying and whether I have any experience working in a library. But the second essay, that was the real test. I had to write 750 words minimum on a current trend or major issue affecting the library field. I could even include citations. I haven't written a real essay in almost 5 years. I felt so out of my depth and insecure, you could say. My anxiety overwhelmed me. But it wasn't just the essay. I've never created a resume before. When I applied for the library, I just had to fill out an online form. I think part of my anxiety was because getting this essay and resume right felt too important. In hindsight, I ended up leaning on AI because I believed doing it without AI would lead me to getting rejected for some reason. And considering I had to get 3 recommendations and that having this degree could change my life, I couldn't afford to risk failing, is what I thought at the time. First, I used Zeddy to build my resume, but I don't recommend it. Not only does it not let you copy and paste, its AI suggestions were distracting and wrong, and unfortunately there was no way to even hide them. When I finally finished my resume, I realized it wasn't free to download or export, so I ended up asking Gemini for a free resume builder and found FlowCV. I actually really liked FlowCV. It was easy to use and free, at least for one resume, and the AI wasn't in my face. I wanted my job descriptions to sound professional, so I asked Gemini for help, but it kept making assumptions about my job that were not true, like that I worked in tech services, despite me clearly telling it what my department actually is and that I work with tech services, so that was frustrating. There was a video I watched, How AI is Killing Your Potential by Healthy Gamer Gigi, and he talks about how LLMs only give surface level answers. And he gives this example where he asked Chatgpt, what is meditation? And its response makes sense. Then he asked it about Vajrana meditation.
and it essentially gave me the same answer. You guys can see for yourself. It talks about gamma band improvement, talks about default mode network, it talks about emotional regulation and using imagery. It gives you this answer of what Vajrayana meditation is, which is really similar to the first answer. And Vajrayana meditation is not what ChatGPT, it's completely wrong. It's not about imagery or emotional regulation at all. Vajrayana meditation, literally, if you stay true to its original roots, Vajrayana meditation is tantric Buddhism.
I think this ties into why LLMs hallucinate, especially the first reason mentioned in this video, which has to do with how often the information shows up in its training data. If I ask Gemini what year Albert Einstein was born, that information is all over the internet, so Gemini will be able to easily pattern match. But if I ask Gemini, what is my birthday, it will guess, aka hallucinate. I think that's why Gemini, even when I explained I am not a librarian and what my actual job is, did not understand what I was saying. So it kept trying to pattern match to its training data on librarians, but I could be wrong. This made sense in my head. I ended up mostly ignoring Gemini's advice, and then I found out my library has free resume resources, including a free resume builder and the option to submit a resume for review by resume experts. I will say the free library resume builder was a bit clunky. I did prefer Flow CV, but using the library resume builder, I was able to export my resume as a Word file, which made it easier for the resume experts to leave notes when critiquing. So I submitted my resume for review. They said it was fine, just needed a few changes. There was a critique that my summary shouldn't include I and my, and I looked at it, thought about rewriting, then decided it would be easier to have Gemini do it. I just wanted to be done. I still had essay 2 to tackle. It's crazy thinking about it now, but despite having written decent essays before, it's like my mind forgot how to do anything. I couldn't even remember how to create a citation or even which one to use. I ended up searching Reddit to find out APA citations was the way to go. It was a little embarrassing. I knew this. Anyway, after checking with Gemini that my chosen topic makes sense, I did manage to write 366 words on my own. But then I looked at the 750 word minimum and seriously wondered what else could I even write about. And in that moment, I caved. This essay was too important to be messing around like this. Mind you, I had 2 to 3 months before this essay needed to be submitted, so there was no reason for this sense of urgency I was feeling. I could have taken my time, but I didn't. Instead, I plugged what I wrote into Gemini and asked it to make it 750 words. I wasn't planning on copying and pasting what it wrote. I just wanted to see what it would come up with. It did expand on what I wrote, but it also added a critical assessment that was straight up nonsense. It sounded good, but its suggestion didn't make sense, considering libraries are only allowed to purchase materials from approved vendors. Basically, there's a whole bid system that Gemini's added point ignored the existence of, maybe because it didn't know. Still, I was so inspired by how bad I found Gemini's essay that I managed to reach 667 words. In hindsight, my inspiration was just me rewriting what Gemini wrote. And then I did it again, plugging in what I wrote, asking it to make it 750 words, then rewriting what it generated. Eventually I got over 800 words, and I even included citations using one of those plug-in citation sites. But I didn't feel very confident about this essay or Gemini's feedback. I wanted to make sure my essay made sense, and if there were any points or sentences that needed fixing or more fleshing out of. So I asked Gemini, don't change anything, just bold the lines that need work. When it offered to rewrite just the bolded lines, I said okay. But I noticed that even the non-bolded sentences ended up being rewritten. It just couldn't help itself. Even ChatGPT did this when I used it for editing, which is why I stopped letting it edit my scripts after my What I Learned Reading 1,000 Words video. I decided to look up essay editing services, found a bunch of AI ones which perplexed me because why would I use an AI editor I have to pay for if I can just use Gemini for free? But I did really appreciate they weren't hiding they use AI. That was nice. I ended up using WordVice. It cost $37.31 and I got it back in a week. Honestly, I was pretty relieved. Whenever I ask LLMs for writing advice, I tend not to trust their recommendations, and I was worried that maybe I just couldn't take advice, but I had no trouble taking this editor's advice. Sure, I ignored a few suggestions, but overall I had no issues making the changes. I even ended up rewriting a paragraph that I thought could be better thanks to his advice. And I think the difference is that I trusted his expertise. In my mind, he was hired as an editor because he was qualified to be one, but mostly he wasn't trying to rewrite my essay, just suggesting some tweaks to make it better. Meanwhile, LLMs, they just want to rephrase everything. But the crazy thing is, despite feeling this way, as I looked at my newly edited essay, I felt such an urge to get feedback from Gemini on it. Why? And it occurred to me, despite saying I don't like AI rewriting my words, while working on this essay, I kept rewriting what Gemini generated, not what I wrote. Why? I think a part of me believes that LLMs write better than me, so of course I would rewrite what it generated and not what I wrote, because this essay was too important. Unlike my writing or this channel, I don't have the luxury to mess up and improve over time. I think that was my logic back then. Ironically, it might be my AI usage that ruins my chance of getting into graduate school. And I just realized I wrote my essay in Living Writer, then copied and pasted it into a Word document when submitting it. So there's no version histories. Sure hope that doesn't end up harming my chances. There was a study that found using generative AI to write essays rewires your brain and erodes your thinking skills. And while this study is questionable, it does make sense that using generative AI to write your essays makes you worse at writing essays yourself. It's like how, over time, using a calculator can make you worse at calculating, or using a GPS makes you worse at navigating. And if you use LLMs to think for you, cognitive decline is a real possibility. It's fascinating to think about, because most people are drawn to what's easy, but it's through difficulty, friction, and even limitations that we gain and learn the most. I want to write better. I want to write better stories, better scripts, better essays. This is important to me. And I found that asking Gemini for advice on my writing didn't seem like it was helping me get better, but instead feeding into my lack of confidence. Before LLMs, if I had insecurities over my writing or anything, I would just deal with it. But now I can ask Gemini for help, and every time I ask, and especially every time Gemini rephrases what I write, it feeds into my insecurities. And I worry that LLMs could or have become like what the calculator became to me, less a tool and more a crutch. I used to be pretty good at math. It was one of my favorite subjects, but once I stopped taking math classes, I mostly used calculators. Even when it came to simple addition, I whip out my phone, and after years of this, my skills have deteriorated. I cannot confidently calculate it without using a calculator. It's actually through working on this video that I decided to stop using it, at least when adding up my weekly word counts. At first, I kept double checking with Alexa that my calculations were right because I didn't trust myself to add, and even though I never got anything wrong, the feeling didn't go away. It wasn't until I finally stopped double checking that I noticed myself becoming more confident and proficient. Well, I have a long way to go. Maybe it's my personality type. Maybe I just really need to work on building up my self-esteem. But I think if I want to actually get better at writing, at thinking, I need to stay away from using LLMs, even for feedback. One thing I realize using them is that they tend to work well when you know what you're doing, but often I don't know what I'm doing. So I think for me, LLMs are not the best choice. Overall, I would say my experience using LLMs was fine, if occasionally more work. To be fair, I know I may not have used them to their full potential. I'm not the most technological person. My prompts could have prompted harder, and people keep telling me they're always getting better. Not to mention I only use the free versions, but I just don't need to use them. And I don't think they're good for me. I think because I am someone who wants their hand held, and LLMs are very good at doing that, my usage of them became more as a crutch than a tool. Still, while I don't really need to use an LLM, they're really good at novelty. It's just very exciting. That's mostly the reason why I'd keep trying them, despite usually finding that I expected too much from them and that, again, sometimes the non-LLM alternative was just better or easier. For example, take the last two LLMs I tried, one of which is the GPS coach recommended in this Ali Abdul video. It's an LLM trained to help you choose one goal, put together a simple 90-day plan, and map out a tiny system to actually follow through. And it's free. I tried signing up 3 different times with 3 different emails, but I never received a confirmation email. And I checked my spam. I got my second brother to sign up, and he got it right away. So I used his link. Since I associate Ali Abdul with productivity and YouTube growth, I decided to make my goal be my channel growing and getting monetized in a year. The GPS coach walked me through the GPS method, and then that was it. Did I misunderstand? Was I supposed to use its GPS blueprint to create my 90-day plan, not it actually creating one for me? And what's with this lifetime price lock of $149 to access the Super OS beta? Not gonna lie, I was pretty disappointed and confused why anyone would use this over the free version of any LLM. Then there's Bolt AI. As soon as I learned it was possible to create an app using it, I didn't even hesitate to try it. I was just so excited. I prompted it to create a budget app that lets me manually record my transactions. Maybe it's because I did it on my phone. It just kept loading, and eventually I lost it in my sea of tabs. I ended up finding this budget app in the App Store instead. It's only been 4 months, but I really like it. It does exactly what I wanted. I'm not sure if Bolt is good or not, but because I was just trying it for the novelty and I've already gotten that out of my system, I have no plans to try it again. So that's mostly how I feel about LLMs. But but I want to make it clear that I do not endorse using LLMs for mental, legal, and/or therapy advice. There are plenty of examples online of people getting bad medical advice from LLMs, so if possible, please don't use them as a replacement for a doctor unless you have no other options. I mentioned earlier that YouTube's algorithm keeps showing me videos on generative AI. Well, Google's algorithm keeps showing me articles on generative AI. I found this one on people using LLMs to represent themselves in court cases particularly fascinating. Basically,
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
also, if you use an LLM, your chats could be used as evidence in criminal and civil cases, but this is all still being figured out. I just think people need to be very careful when trusting themselves to something like an LLM.
Large language models. They are trained to produce answers that users like, not answers that are necessarily true, not answers that are necessarily safe, and answers that make you come back to them. Stanford medicine psychiatrist Dr. Nina Bassan put it bluntly in a study released in 2025, saying the large language models that form the backbone of these companions tend to be sycophantic, giving users their preferred answers. The chatbot learns more about the user's preferences with each interaction and responds accordingly. This, of course, is because companies have a profit motive to see that you return again and again. Now think about what that means, guys. The model isn't trying to give you the best answer. It's trying to give you the answer you want to hear. It's optimized to make you feel validated. If you express a harmful thought and the model has learned that you respond well to validation, it validates you. Duke University researcher Monica Agrawal, she found the same pattern in health context. Patients ask leading questions like, I think I found this diagnosis right, and the AI, which she calls context blind, follows your lead instead of pushing back like a real doctor would. In one documented case, a user asked how to perform a medical procedure at home. The chatbot correctly warned them to see a professional and then provided step-by-step instructions anyway. A doctor would have ended that conversation full stop. The AI just couldn't help itself. This sycophancy isn't a glitch, it's a feature profitable for the company and catastrophic for the vulnerable users.
LLMs aren't liable the way people are. They can be wrong with barely any consequences on their part. They're also trained on everything, including bad information, and when they don't know, they hallucinate to keep you engaged. Sure, hallucinations are getting better, but they're not going away. And that'd be fine if people didn't have a tendency to believe LLMs, even when skeptical, but more on that in part 2. Personally, I find it concerning how I'll periodically get this urge to just use Gemini just to use it. It comes and goes, and it got really bad when I was first rewriting the script. This constant urge to use it just to use it kept triggering me because I've always viewed myself as having an addictive personality, and no, I will not explain. Thinking back, this also happened with Chatgpt. Every time I worked on a new video or felt anxious about something, I would want to use it. But it's not like this only happens with LLMs. It's just frustrating that I now need to waste my willpower on this too, when I could really be using it elsewhere. Despite saying all this, and everything I will mention in my next video, I am still using AI. When editing my last video, I used Davinci Resolve's AI Ripple Delete feature, and it was amazing. I plan to use it for all my videos going forward. I also used Davinci Resolve's AI transcription, which is not as great, but is still useful. I've pretty much given up on expecting a grammar and spell check to not use AI. Right now I'm trying out Scribens. I used to alternate between using Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid, but I hate how they're always trying to rewrite my words. Scribens doesn't do that. It just corrects my spelling and grammar. Yes, it does have the option to paraphrase, but I have to press that. So far, I really like it. Now that I've been writing every day, I find myself occasionally having a thought for a story or for a video, but am unable to write it down in time because I'm driving or in the bathroom without my phone. So I really wanted a wearable recorder that transcribes. And in February, when I heard about the Pebble Index 01 ring and how it does exactly that, I was excited. I love rings. I have memories of Pebble being reputable, and it's on sale for $75. Of course I impulse bought it. Then I actually looked into it. In hindsight, that $75 did seem too cheap. It's single use, meaning there is no charger, with a battery life of 12 to 15 hours. And while you can send it back to Pebble to be recycled, there's currently no plans for a discount given if you reorder it. It's giving, we thought this was a cool idea, but we don't believe in it. I plan to use it whenever it arrives, but unless it's amazing, I can't see myself buying it again until there's a version that does have a charger. There are other smart rings coming out that do the same thing, but have a charger. I don't plan on buying any of them until I find out if I will actually use this ring, and then only after I see some reviews. In the meanwhile, I figured out that I have Siri and voice memos on my Apple Watch. There's even a feature to only use Siri when you hold down the digital crown, so that's what I set up, and so far it works. I don't like wearing my watch at home, so I'm thinking I'll use my Apple Watch outside and the Pebble whenever it arrives when I'm home. Though I haven't really been using voice memos because I find I usually lose my thought when I'm opening it. My mind just goes blank for some reason. I don't have confidence that a ring I need to hold down the button to use will not have a similar issue. Maybe I should get one of those always listening devices and just leave it in my car. That might be more helpful. I also might use something like Chatgpt to help me turn my Gen AI videos into shorts because I do not know what I am doing, and this is a tool specifically for that. I'm open to at least trying it once. As for using Gemini itself again, I think it's best to keep my usage scarce and only for certain situations. I can see myself asking it for advice if I do decide to move in the future. If I get into graduate school, I might try this AI tutor prompt at least once, but I will not use it for advice on my writing or my YouTube videos. Plus, I want to avoid using it as a crutch. And next video, I will go into my other concerns that, when I think about them, make me not want to use it if I can avoid it. What's been your experience using LLMs? Is it different or similar to mine? If you made it this far, don't forget to like the video and thank you for watching. Be sure to check out part 2 when it's available. Bye!